how to paint a detailed and realistic looking bird's beak. That's what I'm going to show you how to do today, so let's get them brushes wet. Hi, my name is Paul Hopkinson and I'm a professional wildlife artist and teach online from my website on how to paint wildlife in watercolour. And if you fancy a free course on how to paint a robin in watercolour, click on the link in my description down below and get those brushes wet. Now when I start on painting beaks, I've really got to think about not just the structure, but also those underlying wash colours, so all the kind of colours we can see behind the scenes. So in this case, what I like to do is wet the background first of all, then start dropping some colours in there. But you've got to really look at that reference photograph and try and look through all that lovely detail that you can see within that reference photo. And as you look through all the details by pinching into that reference photograph on, say, a tablet or an iPad or computer screen, then you can start to see those colours behind the scenes, as I said. It'd be quite amazing as well, the kind of colours that you tend to see. Now I do this well in advance of even starting the painting, so I kind of pre-plan and work out the colours before I make a start. So I could probably spend maybe 10 minutes, half an hour even, just playing with some testing kind of sheets of paper and see if we can get the colours about right. When they're about right, then I can start to drop those colours onto the paper. So I've got the mixes about right, the kind of background colours. You've also got to remember as well when you're working with this, that the colours will dry that little bit lighter as well. So as they dry, naturally, because there's a lot of water in the pigment, they will lighten. But that also depends on the amount of pigment as well you've got within your kind of mix as well. So you can see from the reference photograph that it's quite light in places. So for the top of the beak is a little bit paler. So in order to get that, I need to lift off a little bit of paint as well. But I can do that either at this stage, or I can do that later on by lifting off dry paint on dry paper, obviously. So I can just use a damp, clean brush to do that. Now, whilst this is still wet, I'm going to start dropping in some more colours. A little bit more kind of warmer hues, which I'm looking for as well for this beak. Because even though there's a fair amount of detail within the reference photograph for this, I'm really thinking about, again, all the background kind of shades and colours and hues, anything that we can see, as I say, just behind those details. So you've got to think about the paint consistency. And when I'm looking at the paint consistency, I'm also thinking about the colour for that paint. So I thought, well, I'll add a little bit of red in there as well, just kind of brighten this beak up. And even though sometimes the background can be really, really bright, so I want to start adding this on. When you start to pop on the details over the top, that's when you really start to see it come together, because the details on the top can start to dullen that really bright colour underneath. So sometimes what I like to do is go really bright to begin with, and then dullen that brightness down, if you know what I mean, by adding the layers of detail over the top of that, once it's nice and dry, of course. So very lightly add this colour in, that's what I like to do, and then kind of merge it around a little bit. Not everywhere though, because it's not always going to be the same colour throughout. And you can see that once it's dry, it has definitely lightened, And this is where I can start to think about working with my size double zero brush and look at the details and start to kind of plot out and map out where some of the structure of the beak goes. So you've got the upper part of the beak, the lower part of the beak, and where they join in the middle. So by mapping this out first of all, by pre-planning this and pre-plotting this, I can then start to work on the overall structure of each individual section of the beak, be it the upper or lower part. So think about this and take your time as well. And I try not to overload that brush when I'm doing this, because if you overload the brush, then you go on there with too thick a line. And you want to try and keep this as fine and as tidy as possible. Now just add a little bit of paint, and then what I can do, just very lightly soften that edge. Just it blends slightly to give more of a slight curve feel to that beak as well. I know, I'm going really bright with this colour, but I want to go bright, as I said earlier on, because that will get duller as I start working with the detail over the top. That kind of push all this brightness back a little bit. I still want that brightness to show through, but I don't want to be too intense, if you know what I mean. So working on the top part of the beak first of all, I'm going to add this red in there, like an orangey red feel. But I'm still going to be careful where it goes to as well, just by lifting off a little bit of colour using a larger brush. and just kind of allowing it to blend into certain areas and control that pigment, control that water. Now I look at how much water I like to apply to the paper, and I try not to go too wet, because then it can be difficult to control, can't it, if it's too wet? So having the paper sort of damp to begin with will enable me to kind of work with a more of a kind of careful, more methodical working style without trying to fight, like a big puddle of water on the paper. And don't forget to click on subscribe and like down below. This in turn will encourage YouTube to show my videos to even more budding artists out there and enable my channel to grow. Now this is where I'd like to start to add a little bit more of the duller colours in there, like a bit of indigo, which is obviously more of a blue. And blue being cool, I'm going to start adding this more towards the top of the beak. Now this will allow me to start to create more of a shape, more of a feel of curves and strength within the beak as well. Again, we're still working on these background colours, the background washes. And that's what I'm considering all the time when I'm working on this. Thinking about the undertones. I know that's a pop group, but thinking about the undertones and everything behind the scenes first of all. So working on this preparation first is really vital. It's the key to kind of working and creating a more realistic feel to a beak. But control that water. Also think about as well, when I'm looking at this and considering the drying times. So this isn't dry yet. This is still damp. It's not soaking wet. It's not running down the paper like a waterfall. So I'm still adding a little bit of colour in there as well. And it could blend a little bit, but it won't flood the entire wet area or damp area. So from then on, I start to work on all the layers of all these washes, gradually building up the colours as I go along. Remember, we'll be adding detail over the top of this, but it's got to be completely bone dry like now. And you can see at this point, it's really, really dry. And this is where we can start to add the darker colours. So indigo and lamp black, good combination. It's a cool colour. And I decided to go for cool colours with this, because even though we've got a warmth within the beak itself, the top of the beak is catching the light more. So therefore, in my eyes, what I tend to see is more of a cool shade in places. So using the gentlest of touch and hardly any paint on the brush whatsoever, so literally a dry brush is what you're working with. Just be careful how you apply this paint. Don't go too heavy-handed with it. Just take your time, and that's what I'm thinking about all the time when I'm looking at this. But I'm also looking at the direction of these brush strokes as well. So I'm thinking, okay, let's have a look at that reference photograph and decide on where the direction of the brush strokes go. Akin it to a clock face. That's what I tend to do. For example, these lines are more going towards like a 3 o'clock direction, aren't they? 9 o'clock direction. See what I mean? So that's what you're looking at when you're looking at this. And when you start to think on those sort of terms, you start to see shape. So you can pick out where, for example, the nostril is. You can start to pick out where all the finer details tend to be as well. So these are more of the mid-tone details. Not the fine details, but the mid-tone details. So we're really considering where all these little layers go just by overlaying these smaller details one over the top as you go through the painting process. Like the softening down as well. Alright, so it's gradually building up, isn't it? But by lightly softening down, that's how I tend to think about this. So I'm always working in layers from light to dark. I'm always working in layers for the foundation wash first of all. And then once that's dry, I then think about more layers, not just one layer of detail, but probably 2 or 3, maybe even 4 or 5. Depends on the subject. Depends on how much detail I kind of want to create within that painting, So if I just speed this forward a little bit, you can see what I like to do is gradually add these mid-tones on and increase some of the colour in places. If it starts to get a little bit dull, then just step away a little bit and just go make a cup of coffee and come back with fresh eyes. And then you can see it from a clear perspective then and think, okay, I need to recolour that, or I need to dull that down, or I may need to lighten that in places as well. See what I mean? So that's what you've got to think about when you're working with anything like this. Try not to do it all in one go. Take a break, take a breather. Okay, you want to stand outside, have some fresh air, okay? So now we can start to go in with the slightly darker details as well. So now I'm thinking about the consistency of the paint. We've worked with watery, we've worked with milky, now I'm going to be working with a creamy consistency. So this isn't thick, it's not thick per se as like you get paint out of a tube. It's thick enough so it dries dark. Okay, so there's more pigment than water. And that's what I like to kind of think of when I'm working with creamy consistency. You know, like the kind of cream you would have in a coffee. So really creamy, but not quite as creamy as toothpaste. I like then to add a little bit of light to the beak as well. So I'm going to use some watercolour white. You can, if you want to, use white gouache. But I like to use watercolour white because it's not quite as opaque as gouache, but it's opaque enough to kind of allow some of that colour still to show through a little bit as well. But I'm applying this nearly thick. It's creamy, but it's between creamy and thick, so it's quite thick stuff. But what I want to do is create all the highlights on the top of the beak initially, just by very lightly grazing the surface, allowing some of that colour to show through within the texture of the paper. And that's how I'm looking at this. So again, my eyes are flicking backward and forward all the time to that reference photograph, which is directly in front of me. So don't try and make something up. What you want to do with this, or what I try to do anyway, is try to represent the picture as you see it. So you can only paint what detail you can see, and that's where I tend to look at things. Okay, so what I'm doing now, I'm going to graze the paper and look at all the little highlights around the top part of the beak. So where it comes down from the nostril here, I want to just create just a hint of where the light's catching that beak there. You've also got to think about the light direction as well. And this direction is coming more from above, probably to the top left, no, maybe the top right actually in this case, because it depends on where the highlight is in the eye as well, doesn't it? So probably slightly to the top right hand side, the highlight, where the sun's coming from, catching the top part of the beak, and just any protrusions you can see around that upper part as well. Then using a damp clean brush, I'll go back in there and I'll soften that down. But this is all about preparing it in your mind before you start, as I said. So always think about the colours, always think about the details you'll be adding, and do lots and lots of testing before you start on the painting as well. So now you can see this slowly coming together through all these numerous layers and how it all starts to work. Now when you look at working with feathers as well, and all them fine lines, I really want to kind of bring this beak together by adding some very fine lines over the top. So using a very fine brush, like a size 00 again, then you really want to just partially load that brush. And what I do, I load it in a mixing palette, first of all, with a brownie black colour, which I'm using. And then I load it, roll it as I pull away from that mixing well, and then tap it once or twice on some kitchen roll before I go to the painting. That will then give me the finest tip possible to work on the painting. Now, how do you fancy learning how to paint a robin in watercolour using one of my own personal video tutorials, all the way from the start through to the finish with every single detail shown? Pop on the link down below, go to my website, join as a free member and give it a go. And also, let me know how you get on. I'll see you there.